I'm AJ Gutierrez, and we're here in Boulder, Colorado to connect with Tammy Sumner, who's the director of the Institute of Cognitive Science here in the University of Colorado. In the context of AI, we're just thinking about large language models and its impact on student learning. But are there other types of AI impacting the way in which you're gauging teachers and students? Let's get into it. This is EdHeads. So, Tammy, I'm so excited for our conversation today. So, you are the director of the Institute for Cognitive Science at the University of Colorado. What does that even mean? What is cognitive science and your role here at the university? What does that department do?
The purpose of the institutes is to support interdisciplinary research. They're the primary mechanism for achieving that on campus. And our institute, historically, cognitive science has been the study of the mind from an interdisciplinary perspective: computer science, psychology, philosophy. We have sort of moved beyond that traditional mission to also, and artificial intelligence, to also incorporate a lot of artificial intelligence and computational methods in all of our work. And so I usually introduce our institutes by saying that we look at human intelligence, machine intelligence, and hopefully fruitful collaborations between the two.
That's really exciting because now you're talking about cross-sector, cross-industry experts coming to the table to think about really innovations, and especially when it comes to artificial intelligence. And you and your department's been on the forefront of this work for a long time, even before LLMs. So can you tell us a little bit more about the technologies you all work with and how that's different from, how at least in education we've been thinking about artificial intelligence?
Right. Well, we have faculty who have been working in this space since the late 80s, including faculty like Professor Michael Mosier, who was did early work in neural networks, and later on followed by Professors James Martin, Dan Jurafsky, who's now at Stanford, and of course Martha Palmer in natural language processing. And Jim and Dan literally wrote the book that's most widely used in education for teaching natural language processing. The methods for doing natural language processing have evolved significantly over the past couple decades. Particularly, I'd say the most crucial thing for our work in education was the invention of the transformer architecture, which is, of course, gave rise to all the generative AI models that we have today. But that is the basis of most of our work in this institute and that you'll be hearing about today.
Tell us a little bit more about um, TalkBack and that technology in the context of education and why did you as an institute decide to focus on that area? What potential did you see there?
We began this work to create AI models that could recognize a particular form of instructional discourse, and we chose academically productive talk as our first step down this road. And basically, there was a convergence. So I mentioned transformer architectures, and we felt that the technology was ripe for actually building reliable models. The next step that we needed was automatic speech recognition, because teachers and tutors have to be able to record their classroom sessions in order for us to analyze them. And so there was a lot of advances in both the means for making reliable and recordings that you can actually hear people speak, and also for processing their speech. And then the third leg of our stool was basically advances in learning sciences and educational theory about how students learn. And the reason we selected academically productive talk as our framework, which we didn't create, but many others out in the mathematics education field created and studied, was that it was so well researched and so well specified and had a strong research base that we felt it was ripe for automation.
So, in other words, there is scientific literature on a particular set of talk moves that really lead to high quality instruction for you. So, how
Exactly.
many talk moves are there? What are we
Well,
talking? What?
there's quite a few actually. Um, and what I particularly appreciate about that framework is their talk moves are um, uh, ways of communicating with each other, which are used by both teachers and by students. So it's not a one-way thing. It's about how groups of people can collectively have productive knowledge building discussions. And they trace their roots back to democratic discourse ideals. Um, so in our work, we focus on a subset of the talk moves. So we focus on 6 of the instructor moves and 4 of the student moves. And we worked with a team of researchers at the Institute for Learning and University of Pittsburgh, who were part of the founders of these models, to select um, those for our first pass, as they felt these were the most important moves and some of the more widely used ones.
And how does it work on the back end? How does the technology provide feedback on the talk moves, and how accurate is the technology in articulating the frequency in which they're using these moves?
It's basically pretty accurate, and it's more accurate than most humans.
So
Um,
what are we talking about here in terms?
well, you're talking about generally a good about an 80% accuracy. And so this is, these are subtle things like our students making claims, our teachers asking them to provide reasoning about their claims, or students providing evidence and explanations for their reasoning, our teachers using certain discourse moves that help keep the learning community together and help keep students engaged and accountable to each other. So these are subtle things, and they're hard for humans to even recognize. And so our first step was to again work with the research partners to create what's called an annotation protocol, because all machine learning begins with data. And we wanted at that time, and we're talking 8, 9 years ago, um, to even begin to do this work, the first thing we needed was a high quality data set that we could use to train our models and to evaluate their performance. And so we first had to start by selecting the talk moves we wanted to support. Then we had to create an annotation protocol so that we could then collect um, transcripts from classroom sessions and literally mark them up line by line. Is this sentence a talk move? Yes or no? If it is, which talk move is it? That's the level of detail. And then to get a group of annotators to be able to agree reliably so that if you say, yes, this is someone pressing for reasoning, I should say, yes, that's someone's pressing for reasoning, and we can measure our reliability between these annotators. So we had to get that annotation process going. We had to collect a lot of classroom videos and transcripts, get them transcribed, get them cleaned up, get them annotated, and make sure we're doing that to a very high caliber, very high degree of inter-rater reliability.
And this is primarily started with teacher instruction, right?
Yes, that's how we began with teachers. We were lucky and fortunate enough to receive what's called an EAGER grant from the National Science Foundation, which is for early stage research. And one of the primary qualifications for an EAGER award is that there must be a good chance you'll fail. That's how you know it's early stage. It's high risk, high reward. And when we were trying to begin this work, quite frankly, most people thought it was impossible, that you would never be able to train natural language processing models to recognize classroom discourse with any degree of reliability. And it took us probably 2 years to actually convince someone that this was even worth an early stage research award. And that was crucial because that allowed us to create the initial data set and to create the initial models to show that there was a there and that, we think this could be done.
And so, for context for people, 80% accuracy is roughly what you shared. For context, what would be the accuracy of a normal coach when they're looking at these moves?
Well,
Is it 80%? Is it
it,
just that?
oh,
Or
no. First of all, that data is not available. We looked for that. We'd love to know that information. If I had to guess, I would say maybe half that. Oh, no, it's hard. It's hard.
And just for clarity for people listening, it's not as if you're trying to use this technology to replace coaching, but the potential could help supplement and support coaching.
That's
on
exactly
leaders.
what we're doing with Saga. So we began our, once we had that early stage work and we demonstrated the promise and feasibility, we were lucky enough to get a follow-on grant from the National Science Foundation through the Big Data program, which allowed us to expand our data set, change our model architecture, get much higher performing models, and to embed those into an application, which we then deployed in mathematics classrooms with a partner school district. And there were some COVID-related hiccups there because the pandemic happened 6 months into our first classroom field study. But we had a group of teachers that stuck with us for a couple years, and we were able to gather some longitudinal data. And again, these were not embedded in a formal professional learning model, but the teachers were receiving, they'd self-record a lesson. At the time, it took a little time to process. We'd send them an email. When their feedback was ready, they could pop onto a website, get feedback on that lesson. And we had some promising data that it was over time impacting teachers' instructional practices, and that they were using more talk moves across all the categories, as were their students. So that was very promising. And somewhere in that period was when our colleagues at Saga reached out to us to say, hey, we're very interested in this, providing this sort of feedback to our tutors and coaches. Let's think about how we can work together. And so for the past couple of years, we've really focused on providing this information to coaches who then work with tutors.
To provide that input and guidance.
Yes.
From our perspective, we think coaching is really, really important as we think about the scale of personalization, right? How do you take a rookie educator, give them what they need to be successful engaging youth? And coaching is a very human capital intensive process. And so we can use technology as a way to help support that. Could we have a giant leap forward in making progress toward providing scalable coaching on high quality tutor?
One of the things which really motivated us to collaborate with Saga was the really well-developed coaching model that they have. That was a very attractive idea to explore how this would work within that context. And at the time, SOG was also trying to begin to scale their impact, particularly post-COVID. And so the challenge that the way we thought about our work at that time was how can these models help uh, Saga to scale its already very effective tutoring approach to larger numbers of tutors. And how can this AI support the coaches in that process?
How have people react? How have teachers, maybe tutors, reacted to seeing this data, or has it? I know you talked about it. Some of your research suggesting that it has moved the needle on the frequency of these talk
Mhm.
rooms, but what are people? How are people reacting to seeing this?
In terms of the classroom teachers we worked with, I mean, our research involved a lot of interviews with them just to understand their perceptions of the value and the utility and whatnot. And for the most part, people appreciated actually receiving this feedback, and they also appreciated that it was theirs. So it was not sent to their supervisors or their administrators. It was theirs, and they had agency over who they chose to share it with.
What do you feel are other ways to help build that trust in the data and the information within
Well, it's
that?
really interesting that you should ask me this question today, AJ, because just this morning during our meeting, we were looking at a paper that had just been published by I think, Professor Chen from the University of Hong Kong, who took our public data set, built some models, and did some studies. And he is looking at um, explainability of the models and how that influences trust. And again, early results, but he had some nice results around where they were trying to uh, build some mechanisms into their interfaces that allowed teachers to understand how the models were making their decisions, and was able to show that that also positively influenced trust in the models. So I think that's very promising, very early days work, because explainability and trust is a cutting edge topic in AI at the moment. But building on our public data set show that that mattered for these teachers.
I've seen some research studies that suggest that many teachers don't feel as if they receive enough professional development. And for those who do receive professional development, not many are satisfied with the quality of that. And that made me think of you and your work because, what if we can find a way to empower teachers to take
Mm.
ownership of their own professional development and using this technology as a way, as one pathway to do so. And I can imagine a scenario where, let's say, a talk move is suggested. Um, could we, in turn, connect it to a module? Say, hey, you need to work on your wait time, or asking for or probing for questions. Here's a module to help you practice. Have you thought about that? Do you see the potential in connecting those
Yeah,
paths?
absolutely. And we'd love to do exactly that, AJ. And this has been known for decades that teachers do not have an are not receiving enough professional development to support their growth and learning. And we also know that a lot of it is disconnected from practice. It's abstract, it's about whatever. It's really not tied to their students or what they need to do in the classroom. And so part of what we wanted to do with this work is to really create that very, very strong connection between the teacher and their students and their practice. And that's done through the fact that um, we're building the feedback off of a video record of their practice. And the use of video records in professional learning has been something that has gained a lot of traction over the past decade or so. And we've just taken it to that next level by building that personalized feedback on those records. and teachers really are motivated to do whatever they can to improve their student engagement. I mean, they think first about student engagement, student participation, and then about student learning, usually because if the students are not engaged, they're probably not benefiting. And I mean, because most teachers are there because of the kids and they want to do anything they can to help their kids.
How should a district leader think about this as technology or AI from your perspective and when it comes to professional development?
Well, um, so it's not just about, using our system or buying whatever system and say, okay, teachers, now, use this for your professional learning. But, is there a period in the day when the teachers can get together within their professional learning community to review their data together and to discuss it and to develop strategies for changing their instructional practice based on what they're observing? Can they do this more than once? So could this be a weekly activity where the teachers are doing this journey together in a very supported way? So, back to that old adage, may all your problems be technical. Teacher learning is not a technical problem. Technology can help, but ultimately it's a social problem, a social challenge that
And a human capital
and
challenge,
a
right?
human capital challenge.
What do you see the future potentially being like? What's the next derivative of talkback, in other words? Where do you see it going?
Well, what we're working on at the moment, and again, this is very much motivated by Saga, and as you said, the tutors are working with these small groups of students. It's not one-on-one tutoring. It's tutors working with a group of, say, 3 students. And these are students for whom the traditional educational system has not been as successful for them. And so creating that positive learning relationship, that positive community with them is so, so important. It's important for all students. It's really important in this context. And so we've been working to develop new models around a framework called belonging centered instruction, which has been developed by Dr. Jamal Matthews at University, Michigan. And basically, our models are now reaching the level of performance where we are ready to deploy them and to think about some professional learning around them. So for us, that's really sort of next, the work over the coming 12 months is to get these belonging centered. And we're not doing the full framework. It's actually, again, and it's a very rich framework. We selected one of the dimensions that seems really important for math, which is safety to be wrong. So many students are reluctant to speak out in mathematics conversations because they think it's about having the right answer and not putting your ideas on the table and building on them. So we focused on that dimension, and I think we're reaching the stage where we're ready to put it in operation and go from there.
And that body of research is really fascinating. I know people on my team are a little more involved in that with you all. And what I found really intriguing about that work, from my understanding, is that it integrates the latest research on belonging, and it really distills what are the most important foundational things for students to know in order to be successful in something like Algebra 1. And are there really basic things we can do from a professional development perspective so that math instructors can be much more successful? And from that research, there are some really simple things can do that can have a dramatic impact on the success. And I find that absolutely encouraging.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Again, it for the past however many years, the big focus in AI and education has been on, personalized tutoring, and at a very strong cognitive perspective. And, I am a director of an Institute of Cognitive Science, so I totally respect that and buy into it. But, a lot of learning is sociocultural. And, and at least our work has definitely emphasized the human relations and trying to think about how we can use AI to help teachers and tutors and students um, build richer and more productive collaborative learning arrangements in the classroom. And it's very hard. It's very hard. People are not just born knowing how to engage in high quality collaborative work. It's practice, it's training, it's getting the right kind of scaffolding to do it well. In fact, in one of our projects, one of our colleagues was doing a lot of focus groups with students, and quite frankly, their perspectives on collaborative learning were not terrific because they've had some bad experiences.
Yeah.
Um, and so, how do we change that?
Well, I really appreciate everything you're doing to have an impact. It's such a pleasure to walk alongside you and support you. And in the small way we do Saga Education, I really appreciate your time connecting with me.
Well, thank you so much, AJ. It's been a pleasure.